Let's move Discord over there, and then oops. Okay. Cool. Yeah. So I'm actually so curious. Like, I know something about Annabelle's game, and Lucille and Magnus, I know something about your game, but the rest of you, I'm like really curious to see what you've been up to. So maybe there's a few minutes after today's session to, like, if you want, you can sort of catch me up on what you've been doing. I'm gonna jump in, and so I briefly spoke to Stefan about this yesterday, like the topic for this workshop, and I realized, I just kind of went on a GDC rabbit hole and sort of explored topics that I find interesting. So I'm not exactly sure, if it's necessarily going to resonate with everybody. I find this stuff like really, really fascinating. I'm convinced though that it is something that you can, that is kind of applicable, to many different kinds of games. It's not just like a sort of very narrative heavy games, obviously, but yeah, let's see how it goes. Okay, so I do have some, theory stuff to quickly run through, and then later on, we have like a bunch of questions that we can sort of just sort of stand still at for a second, and yeah, like let's see if we can actually find some cool ideas and inspiration for either for your current games or for like future games, regardless. All right. Cool. I see Herman says, sorry, can't join the class right now. Okay. I guess I can go ahead and record this as well. OBS is going to slow down things a bit, but let's quickly do
Oh, don't
that.
worry about that. I'm recording then.
Okay. Oh, awesome. Thanks, Jared.
Cool.
Okay. Okay, cool, guys. So yeah, like today's session is kind of like a mix between it's like narrative conceptualization and also obviously aesthetic and visual conceptualization, thematic conceptualization. It's just kind of all of those things thrown into one mix of things. So before we get to the theory stuff, like I have like a straightforward question for you, and I kind of purposefully leave this question very vague. My question is simply, if you think back, like what are some of the games that made like a really, really deep impression on you? Right. So that could be, I guess, emotional impression. It could be like an aesthetic impression, world building. Maybe some characters just kind of stay with you. Yeah, like what are the first games that kind of come to mind? So you can obviously use the text channel to pop your questions in there of your answers. Cool. Annabelle says Skyrim. Right, it's a classic. Maybe we should also add to the question, like, why exactly? Like, can we actually pinpoint why a certain game made this really big impression on you? Or did games make like an impression on you, but you're not exactly sure why? That's also possible. Cool. Jared says Firewatch. Jonathan says Witcher, Titanfall 2, Ghost Runner, Portal 1 and 2. So funny that you mentioned Portal, Magnus, because I very distinctly remember in my third year, I'm kind of giving away my age, but in my third year, I had this deadline the next day, and somehow I just like got caught up in Portal, I think the first one, and just kind of stayed up all night, like playing Portal, like finishing the whole game. And obviously I was a wreck the next day, but somehow like the work actually still also got done. Like I met the deadline. So that's kind of like my this distinct memory that I have of Portal, right? Yeah, totally worth it. Totally. Cool. I see Annabelle says it was the first time that I ever played for a super long time, so I learned a lot from playing it in terms of controls. All right. Awesome. Hey, cool. Hermanus is also here. Age of Empires 2. I was very young, and it was just amazing having an opportunity playing computer games. All right. The mystical. So I also like started with the PlayStation 1 back in the day, and like computer games, like that was kind of something that other people did. And Age of Empires also actually happened to be sort of my gateway game, I guess you can say. All right. Cool. Yeah, I'll keep an eye on the comments there, so you guys, yeah, you can still leave your answers there. But I do have a few sort of my own answers, and I might have been a bit biased, with these games that I chose. And these are also chronological. So way back, like a gazillion years ago, if I think back, to some of the first games that made like a really, really deep impression on me, as Spyro comes to mind, mostly because, well, I probably didn't really realize it at the time, but it's probably just exploring these different worlds, right? Like I kind of remember this, just like this sort of overwhelming curiosity. Just like, okay, you start with your home world, and then you just sort of, you're like so curious to see like every new world, like go explore these different portals and different themes and stuff and different characters. So there was that sense of wonder, right? It's like the silly games, like, okay, the sort of a dragon with a lot of attitude, stomping around and hurting innocent creatures. But that sense of wonder, that's kind of what stays with me, right? Cool. Yeah, just quickly scanning through the comments there. Cool. Jonathan says it was all aesthetic pleasing for me. To be honest, these games were the first games that were a big influence on my gaming childhood. These games were the first to have me go, oh crap, these are amazing graphics and amazing gameplay. Okay, so you're actually conscious enough about, okay, there's like actually this gameplay sort of visuals separation. That's interesting. Stefan played Bubble. It's like really nostalgic, right? Like it's a bit of a trip down memory lane. Zoo Tycoon, Annabelle says Zoo Tycoon, a lot of good memories. Diablo 3, wow, that escalated quickly, Annabelle. Played it with my dad when I was in primary school. Okay, so fond memories, right? Like fond memories of playing it with friends or family. Okay, very cool. So Spyro, the first game that came to mind. The first RPG I think that I played was Knights of the Old Republic, and I think in this case, what really struck me was the complexity of the world. Right? It's every now and then you just like stand still in this game and sort of take a step back and think, okay, so I have to do this so that that person can do that, and then that faction is going to behave that way, and then that's going to allow us to do this thing, and it's just like this amazingly convoluted story, of like different ecological effects, cause and effect, and let me say ecological relationships between all the things in the world, and that's the thing, right? That really struck me about this particular game. I can't say I actually really understood, the mechanics, the actual really hardcore sort of role playing stuff, but the world just like really fascinated me, right? Okay. Don't despair, though. This isn't just going to be me talking about the games that I like for the whole 2 hours. Fast forward a bit. 2010. Well, I think I played this game a bit later than that, but Fallout New Vegas. The sort of mystical, moody Mojave wasteland. Really strange experience, right? It's like this really, classic Fallout. Just this really goofy game, actually. Goofy characters, goofy robots and stuff, but something about this wasteland just made this really, really deep impression on me. Right. And I was telling one of my other classes the other day that I think in retrospect, maybe this sounds like super cheesy, but in retrospect, I played this game at the end of my third year, and it was like this weird December. It's like this weird limbo between your third year and honors year and all of that stuff. And I think this game actually did this really great job of kind of, emulating or simulating, the space that I was in. Like I said, maybe that sounds super cheesy, but this wasteland, right? This limbo, and you just kind of explore. You're kind of on your own mission, but everything just feels so slow and ponderous, and like a really, really big moment or like milestone, I think. Every now and then I'm just quickly going to scan through the comments there. Jared says flying over northern end, listening to Netsky. Such nostalgia. Yeah, so nostalgia is like a super powerful emotion, right? But so elusive. But yeah, that's that's what I feel with all of these screenshots. It's just like, wow, so nostalgic. Cool. Yeah. Did anybody else actually play this game? I kind of want to stand still at this one for a second. Cool. Paolo says Earthworm Jim, the original Castlevania, remind me why I enjoy playing games. All right. Cool.
Never played New Vegas. I played Fallout 3, and that was amazing.
Right. Yeah. Yes, I also played Fallout 3, and then I was kind of skeptical about this because, like, how can a desert be as interesting as, like, the Capital Wasteland? But somehow, like, the atmosphere in this desert was just really, really amazing. And like I said, I think the reason why it resonated with me so much at that point was it almost became like this representation of my mind space, just like this weird limbo space, trying to sort of forge your own path, kind of find sort of find your own path in this wasteland. Cool. Jonathan says nope. To be honest, never touched any Fallout games. Okay, shame, Jonathan.
Yeah, that's a pity.
Right. But like I said, it's like really weird games because they're so goofy, right? Like so goofy in many aspects, but so good in so many other aspects. Okay, well, yeah, let's move on. Classic Dark Souls. Yeah, not exactly quite sure what to say about this game, except that it was like a really, really unique experience. I think up until that point, there wasn't like really a game that made my heart beat so fast. It's like in the boss fights and like those really tense moments. But I think the mistake that we can make, when we talk about Dark Souls, is that we kind of look at those things like, okay, it's like the difficulties, the crazy difficulty of the game and the weird character design of the bosses, and then we kind of miss this really, let me say, this sort of really strong theme of navigating this really dark world, and like sometimes you have these spaces that are kind of counterintuitively dark, out of like from a game designer's point of view, like you can't see anything in this space, and yet you're sort of expected to. It just feels like a really risky game design decision, and yet, like these spaces were so memorable, right? Really dark and so moody and mysterious. Something about that captures something I think really. Let me say it resonates with something really. It's difficult to put into words. I don't know. How do you guys feel about Dark Souls? While I take a sip of tea.
It's one of the franchises that I've never gotten into. I think I don't play games for that kind of challenge. I like to play games to kind of analyze and forge my own path and strategize. That's my kind of games. So
Okay.
Dark Souls has never appealed to me just because it's just so hardcore. Even like in The Witcher 3, the expansion pack, I got stuck at fighting this giant frog boss in the sewers, and it's just been one of those bosses that's been so difficult, and I don't have the skill set. I don't enjoy those kind of games to actually get past the frogs. So I've never been able to get back into The Witcher 3 to complete the DLC.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So I'm glad you say that because, like I said, I think that's kind of the main thing that people associate with Dark Souls. But to me, I think the thing that really resonated with me was the thematic experience, of making your way through this dark world, and it's almost like cathartic, right? To sort of reach a new bonfire, then you light the bonfire, and then you sort of unlock this new area of nightmare and terror and despair. But then you kind of work through that as well, and you reach a new bonfire, and it's like there's something really cathartic about that experience. Right?
I mean, I like that experience in Tomb Raider, for instance. So they also got like the campfire thing. You complete a whole puzzle set, you defeat some enemies, you find your way through the world, but that's like a sort of more platforming in a way. And then you get to your campfire and you get some skills upgraded and you upgrade your weapons and stuff, and then you carry on.
Yeah.
No, I agree with Jared. I agree completely. I think the problem with this game for me, I really enjoy it, but the thing is, it's for a different generation. You'll see how games are designed for the generation that they're making them for, and this generation is an extremely competitive one. So that's why a game like this for a certain niche market who wants to test their skills all the time is a really good game. Whereas like this games that are built in this kind of idea, like God of War, that are a lot like it's more forgiving unless you play the new game plus, which is a whole different story. But if you play that, it's got the same kind of elements as Dark Souls, but it doesn't make you feel really bad for sucking at the game, which is what I do when I play Dark Souls. I suck at it so hard. But yeah, no, I do enjoy the game. I prefer Bloodborne for some reason to Dark Souls, but that's just my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, but I would imagine it's I think I would sort of enjoy any one of those titles, just because it's that same sort of basic structure, right? Like this sort of cathartic therapeutic process of working through a challenge, reaching a safe point, working through a challenge and reaching a safe point. But yeah, we're going to actually get back to that idea a few times. I think I have one more example, right? So good old Inside. I put this game up in this list because, well, mainly because it just like made me feel emotions that I didn't really even know I had. You know, it's like this really, really fascinating experience. And you know, for like a theming or like a narrative workshop, a conceptualization workshop, this game is such an outlier, right? Because there is like no narrative, and yet you find yourself being so immersed and so invested and so enraptured in a way. And then that ending just breaks you, right?
Don't spoil.
Okay, but in any case, sorry, yeah, did I cut somebody off there?
No, just don't spoil the ending.
Like, I might actually.
Okay.
Well, I will definitely actually.
I don't know. It's a what the fuck moment. That's what the ending is. I'm not giving anything away, but like when you get to the end of the Inside, you're like, what the fuck?
Right.
You're more confused than you were when you started. You're like...
Yeah, it's we can return to that idea a bit later on. But, yeah, no. So okay, spoiler alert. I am definitely going to spoil some of the ending. You know, not the ending, but you know the grim bits. Okay, so the thing is, and maybe we can already see that in these examples that we chose, but my fascination with these games, and actually like all games, is this idea that, okay, so it's all different stories, all different games, different visual styles and stuff, but underneath the surface, it's actually based on these very mythical experiences almost, right? Like it's like we spoke about, like Dark Souls being like having this pattern of moving through a nightmare and terror and stuff, and then reaching a safe point, and then doing the same thing again. But then you actually see the same thing in God of War maybe, and then you see the same thing in Tomb Raider games and stuff like that, right? So we can kind of see these patterns, right? We can see these patterns and structures and themes repeat in many different games, right? And the theory that I want to propose today is that is kind of the things that resonate with us, right? Like it's those things that kind of underneath the surface, you know, the mythical currents, the mythical capacity of these games that really resonate with us and make us sort of care about these stories, right? So that's kind of going to be our theme for today. Disclaimer, you know, it might become a bit sort of trippy, and at points, you know, you might have to use your imagination and suspend disbelief a bit, but we are going to sort of explore this idea of myths, archetypal experiences, memories, and dreams, and how that actually relates to games, right? And I think ultimately, you know, so this is my, you know, measure of success for this session. I think, you know, this session will be a success if at the very least you know, by the end of the session, you have a new or a different way to think about games, just in general. I mean, you guys have thought about games for like 3 years now, like really in depth. You know, you've been doing game design and encountering all these different theories and stuff. So I totally acknowledge that, you know. But let's see if there's maybe like a new way altogether that we can think about narrative and aesthetics and stuff. All right. I also think that the session will be a success if you have a new way to think about how real life actually plays into games and vice versa. So, you know, how can we take our real life experiences and sort of infuse games with that, you know, and infuse it with emotion and empathy and, you know, make it really resonate with people, right? Or third point, no, I think this session will be a success if ultimately, you know, you have a new way to think about how all the different parts of a game kind of work together, you know, so the visual design, the mechanics, the narrative and everything, the sound design. Because ultimately, you know, my theory is that once you have clarity on that sort of a mythical capacity or mythical themes and stuff of your game, those are the things that can actually filter into all the different parts of the game, right? The mechanics, the sound design, the visuals, and everything. All right. Okay, and then simply, if you guys feel stoked about the games you're making, that's also going to make this session a success. Or just like curious about like where the process is going to take you, or what you can do with this stuff in the future. And then lastly, if you see game design as this, unfolding story that can be continually rewarding, right? Mostly because, it deals with, or it can deal with, like all those sort of archetypal, universal, deeply sort of resonant stuff that we all kind of care about. Okay, but a lot of this stuff probably won't make sense straight away, so let's jump in. First, very important clarification at this point is when we use the word myth, I'm not actually talking about like myth in the sense of, falsehoods. Like when we use the word myth, like if I quickly jump back to this slide, with things like Mythbusters or, the efficiency of face masks is a myth. That's not how we use the word myth today, right? Rather, how we're gonna use the word myth is kind of in the same way, that ancient peoples would have talked about stories, right? So if we think about Greek mythology, Norse mythology, all of those things, and we think about how they kind of came up with these stories to make sense of themselves and make sense of things like the weather and rock formations, or natural phenomena, whatever the case may be. That's kind of how we're going to use the word myths, right? It's stories, stories that we know might be fictional and stuff, but we use those stories to make sense of things in real life. Okay, so that's going to be our sort of a basic definition for today, right? So back to the Greek mythology thing. I was kind of jumping ahead there for a second. But Bob Bates, he's like a game writer. I'm not exactly sure on what games he's worked on, but he has this really fascinating, like really cool article on Kama Sutra, where he says that myths, in essence, kind of convey the values of a society, right? It's how people, in all ages have kind of taught each other how to behave and, who they are and what they are and stuff like that. So we're kind of building on that definition to simply say that myths, simply stories, events, people, characters, and stuff that make up our understanding of the world, right? Or make up our mental landscape, so to speak. Okay. So, jumping back to this, if ancient peoples use these stories about like Perseus and Prometheus and Hercules and all those characters to make sense of, their world, they have the gods and like these sort of wars between the Titans and the gods and what have you, to make sense of their world, I kind of think that, what would our myths be? If we have to, like, if we have that definition of myths that, it's like these stories that we use to understand the world, wouldn't our stories, like our myths, be things like games and films and books, right? Guys, get where I'm going to, right? So, does that make sense so far? I feel like I'm just rambling ahead here. Do we all have sort of clarity on how we're going to use the word myth today? I'm guessing, that you might have sort of encountered the word myth in a story and ritual, right? You did the hero's journey and you did the archetypes and stuff. So it's very much the same angle that we're going to use today, right? Okay, so as we're going about in real life, we actually have this awareness, all these stories and characters and things floating around in our heads about Darth Vader, sort of redeeming himself by, throwing the Emperor down the, the shaft, whatever. We have this story about Eowyn facing off against the Witch King, this sort of unlikely hero that faces off against this, almost impossibly powerful enemy. We have Joel, we have Ellie, we have Ori. We have all these characters, all these events and stuff floating around in our heads. And I would say those could be the things, the myths that we kind of use to not necessarily understand our world, but kind of color in our world, right? Color in our understanding of the world. All right. Okay, cool. So We are going to go a bit deeper though. So there's going to be a lot of sort of self-reflection, I think, today. There's like a section later on where I have a lot of questions, and you guys can just sort of take the questions and think about what this means for you personally. But yeah, we are actually going to also consider our own personal mythologies, right? So I would say that myths aren't just this stuff, right? It's not just like these like films and books and what have you. It's also all like the real stuff that actually happened to you, right? All the real people that you know, or real things in your own history, your own mythology that kind of plays into your mental landscape, right? Okay, and that's going to be important for later on, so make a mental note of that. Our own personal mythologies can actually be this. We're going to see that our own personal mythologies can be this library, right, of mythical experiences that we can kind of draw on to make stuff. Okay. It's a quick throwback. Those of you who had concept art for games last year, you might remember this. Right, so when we did character design, we spoke about characters in very much the same way. We said that, okay, character is kind of made up out of a physical body. It's made up, well, a character has a quest and a role and stuff like that. But then also a character has this mythology, right? Each character has their own mythology, which is like the backstory, the culture, where they grew up, like how wealthy or poor they are, the religion they subscribe to, the language, all of that stuff, that kind of filters into their mental landscape. Okay. Yeah, so some of you might get sort of flashbacks of this. I think, Jonathan, you might have done this twice, right? Because we also did it in 2D character design. I find that it's a really helpful way to think about characters and real people even. Not that, people fit into these neat little boxes, obviously, but it's a great way to kind of get your head around who a character is, right? Only difference is today, we're actually going to put ourselves in that situation, right? We're going to actually consider our own mythologies, our own narratives. Okay, cool. So the question is at this point, what exactly does this all actually mean, right? Like, what is the value of this, for games? It's one thing, to say that, okay, there are myths in games, and okay, so some games are kind of similar in some ways just because they're based on these myths. But ultimately, what does it mean? Like, what is the purpose of this? Like, why bother with this question? So I have a few quotes. Like I said, I went down like a GDC and Gamma Sutra rabbit hole for like a few weeks, and it's mostly just stuff that I find like really, really interesting. So James Frey, he's like a writer. I think just like a normal sort of literature writer. He doesn't write games, but he says that when a human encounters some version of a myth, whatever the case may be, some myth about, like, let's say Darth Vader, earning his redemption by maybe killing the Emperor or something like that, some version of a myth, they respond at a very deep level, subconsciously, and they are powerfully drawn to it as by magic. The force of myth is irresistible. Mythic forms and mythic structures are the foundation on which all good stories are built. And these forms and structures are the key a good storyteller can use to create powerful fiction. That's kind of a mouthful, right? There's a lot of stuff in there. But I think the main takeaway from this quote is that first bit, right? Like, when we encounter a myth, like especially I think specific myths, it just resonates with us very deeply, right? Because we kind of understand the myth in some way, right? Or we've encountered that myth before. Maybe we've encountered that myth in our own lives or something like that, right? Okay, so a few other quotes. Bob Bates, the game writer again, he says that as game makers, we have to pick the myths we think people should believe in and then embody them in our own games. Or if we think there are myths that are harmful, that people shouldn't live by, which is more often the case, then our game should destroy those myths and then give players new myths to live by. Okay, so as a game writer, the myths you create have the power to change lives. Wow, right? It's a very lofty statement. Do we actually think about games this way? Like, it's very, very lofty language, right? Okay, cool. But yeah, let's see a few other things. I specifically decided to include this guy, the Jason Vandenberg. I don't know if you guys know this character. He's worked for Ubisoft, I think, as creative director. I'm not exactly sure where he is at the moment. Really fascinating guy. I think I sort of encountered him for the first time in it must have been the year when For Honor was introduced at E3, and I mean, you have all these sort of game developers that are kind of awkwardly on stage and sort of talking about their games. You can see they're really uncomfortable, and then this guy gets on stage, and he kind of does this roar, and he's like full of charisma and a lot of personality and attitude. So, it's kind of worthwhile to watch his talks just to enjoy him. And I kind of want to be like this guy when I'm older, so that's why he's peeking out at the bottom there. But he says that I create imaginary worlds where imaginary people have imaginary conflicts that, plot twist, illustrate real truth, right? And he does that with allegory, right? Which is very much the same as myths, right? It's using one story to maybe illustrate it like a different story. And he goes on to say that deeper meaning, that second layer of experience, where what you are doing makes sense all the way down, that is what I'm here to do. So out of context, this quote might be a bit confusing, but he talks about all these games that he's played. If we quickly jump to the next slide, all these games that have kind of imparted very valuable lessons or ideas to him. But those games did it through allegory, right? You can watch Star Wars and, okay, yes, on the surface, it's about like the rebellion, like the Republic versus the Empire, and you have like the personal struggles of the people sort of caught up in all of these sort of big conflicts and stuff. But then underneath the surface, there could be these ideas, like he says, about embracing your full potential, right? Believing in the magic of human will. When you watched Alien, you realize that the world has monsters in it. Or Highlander, it's all about protecting the helpless. Or Dungeons and Dragons could be about success coming through perseverance and planning. Ultima, about principles matter. All right, so that's what he means when you make a game or you play a game and something in the game just like resonates very, very deeply with you, right? Where it makes sense all the way down, as he says. Okay. So yeah, really fascinating character. I highly recommend it to go watch his talks. So Jared, Paulo, Stefan, you guys might be more sort of familiar with the theories and stuff, so you'll be in a position to say if his ideas are actually like any good. But I just really enjoy the talks. All right, cool. All right, and then I'm just going to throw in like another few ideas into this mix. As Nicole Lazaro, you guys might know her. Like she's come up with this sort of a 4 keys of fun idea, or 4 keys to fun. So you have all these different fun, or like types of fun, and kind of resonates with people differently, because it kind of appeals to different motivations and stuff. The one that I'm interested in this list is that last one, right? Where she says that some games have what you call serious fun, and that is all about meaning and progress. And this kind of fun, she says, can actually change the way the player, or change the player and actually change their world, right? Games that prepare the player to think about the world in a different way. All right. So maybe you're starting to see the pattern here. We're jumping back here. We're talking about, James Frey saying that we respond very deeply to myths. We have Bob Bates. We have Bob Bates that says, that as a game writer, you can use myths to pretty much change lives, change that way people think and behave and stuff. We have Jason Vandenberg saying that those lessons, those ideas, those mythical things that games impart to him, that's kind of why he does what he does, right? That's why he makes games. Right, and he kind of wants to do that for other people as well, right? He wants to make games that kind of resonate with people in a very deep way. Right, we have Nicole Lazaro that says that serious fun games can change the player and change their world. Right, and then last one, we have Jeremy Bernstein. Okay, we kind of have to stand still here for a second because there's a bit of an argument that we have to follow. But his talk his GDC talk is all about how you can create strong video game characters. And his main premise there is that you want to create unity between the player and the character, right? You kind of want to make it easy for the player to identify with the character and sort of be on board with what the character is doing. Right, so that you kind of so that you actually care about what the character is up to, right? So there's all these different types of unity that you can create between a character and a player. The most important one, he says, is unity of purpose, right? And that is the thing that makes you care about what the character actually does, or their quest and their struggles, their inner conflicts and stuff like that. And the best way to get a player to actually care about the character and establish that unity of purpose is to actually create empathy, right? And then in turn, you can create empathy by actually having the player and the character share certain experiences. Okay, so I think I'm going to repeat that, just because it's like a sort of a convoluted argument. But we want the player to feel or like to identify with the character, right? We want to have the character to be on the player to be on board with the character. So to do that, we have to establish unity of purpose. To establish unity of purpose, we have to create empathy. We have to make the character care. Okay, goodness, this is confusing. We have to make the player care about the character. And to create empathy, we can have the player and the character share certain experiences. Right. Okay, so that's like a long, convoluted argument there. He very helpfully in his talk sort of breaks down this intro to Uncharted 2. And like all these little touches, that they sort of worked into the cinematic to make us actually empathize with Nathan Drake, right? So things like, just like sharing thoughts, like not necessarily, or like being in the same boat that he is in. Like we don't know what's going on, but like actually he also doesn't know what's going on. So we kind of resonate with him, right? Or like all these small little touches that actually make us empathize with him. So if you're really curious about that idea, about empathy and unity of purpose, highly recommended to just go Google this talk, Creating Strong Video Game Characters. My takeaway from this is that it's really powerful to have the player and the character actually share experiences. Okay, that's kind of why I put this in here. That's the thing that links it with all of these other quotes as well, right? It's like those deeper experiences that can kind of create this link between, or this connection between the character and the player. Okay. Goodness, any questions so far though? Anything to report from your side? I was kind of afraid that it's it's like a lot of quotes, a lot of ideas that I'm throwing out. The main takeaway so far, like I said, is so if you can work myths, into your games, if you can have the game sort of resonate with the player by creating or like using myths and these sort of archetypal experiences, then it resonates very deeply with people, and it can also make you or help you empathize with the character. Right. Okay, cool. Let's see. I have a few more quotes, and then we can look at more pictures. Harrison Pink, he's one of the game designers or game writers that worked on some of the Telltale games. I'm forgetting the other one. But I think he worked on The Walking Dead and some of the other titles. But okay, so this is like a guy that kind of lives, every day, like in these considerations about narrative and like how do we get players to care and like how do we craft that into a game and stuff, right? So he says that a player who spends their time sharing experiences with the character will find themselves attaching themselves much closer and faster than if you just like passively occupy the same space in the world as the character. All right, so again, the idea of sharing experiences, sharing the same experience with the character. Okay, yeah, so that's kind of our first milestone for today, is that we can use myths, if we look at all those quotes, like all those things that those people said, and these people with like a lot of experience, a lot of research and stuff, we can come to this conclusion that we can use myths and mythic structures to have a story resonate deeply with the player and create empathy between the player and the character. But it's actually more than that. We can also see in some of those quotes that when we make games, or when you create any kind of narrative, sometimes you are simply retelling myths, but you also have the option to maybe explore myths, kind of help people understand myths more clearly or more deeply. You can challenge certain myths, like Bob Bates said. It's like sometimes you kind of have to spot myths that are kind of harmful and not helpful, and then you kind of have to challenge those myths and kind of give the player a new myth to sort of live by. Or sometimes you can simply build myths from scratch, right? If that's even possible, actually. Okay, so it's all about resonating with or having the story resonate with the player. It's about creating empathy. And then you also have like all these things that you can do with myths, right? Like you can help people think differently about myths and challenge harmful myths and all of those things. Okay. Cool stuff. So I don't know if this was a good idea. Like like everywhere, people tend to be very opinionated about this title. But precisely on that point, of challenging certain myths, I thought, The Last of Us Part 2 did a really great job, right? It's this really, I feel like a very narratively elegant experience, actually. Okay, so there are like obviously some weirdness here and there and some dissonance and so on, but ultimately, what I appreciated about this game is the way that it kind of challenges I think we can say that it challenges the hero myth, for example, right? Like this myth of like the hero that is also righteous and their quest is true and everything. This game shows us that obviously real life is like way more complicated, right? And people just kind of react, based on their own mythologies, their own experiences, and all the lines between sort of good and bad become kind of gray, right? It becomes kind of fuzzy. Yeah, so let's actually open up the floor. Let's. Do you guys agree with me on that point, or do you think the game succeeded in that? Does it? Yeah, let's hear what you guys think.
Well, I haven't played the game, so I can't really comment on it.
Okay, yeah, so me neither, actually. I just like watch the playthrough. Yeah, it's fascinating, right? It's like a fascinating.
I think if anyone's played it, it would have been Paulo, the only PlayStation.
Right. Cool. Yeah, so I see a few people typing. Annabelle said, definitely agree. I think that it was really well-made game, and they executed the story well. Okay, awesome. Cool. And Jonathan can't comment. Have not played or watched anything on it. Okay. Yeah, so I think it just kind of helps, like in all the discussions about this game, all the different opinions flying around. I think it's helpful, to have this idea of myths in our heads. Like, is the game actually challenging harmful myths? Is it actually reinforcing helpful myths? Is it helping us sort of understand specific myths? But like, what myths are we dealing with, and what is the game actually doing with those myths? All right. Cool. Miguel says, I would say it's a split. In some cases, it does indeed succeed, but there are a lot of glaring problems and flaws in the story that can take you out of the experience. Okay, cool.
You're just looking at the reviews on Google here, and half of them are 5-star and half of them are 1-star, and there's like nothing in between that. You either love it or hate it.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure, I can't remember who said this, but I'm pretty sure some artist or design theorist once said that that's probably the hallmark of a good game, or like a sort of a groundbreaking game, I guess.
Yeah.
Some people are going to love it, other people are going to just really hate it. Okay, cool. Annabelle also says, I think some of the critiques were unfair and unnecessary. Miguel says, especially since you're dealing with an established IP, so there is some set expectations that weren't exactly made, to put it lightly. Okay. Yeah, so, but just imagine how boring it would have been. I mean, if it was really just like a a reskinned, sort of regurgitated version of the first game. The game kind of had to do something new, right? It had to take some of those myths and some of those ideas and challenge it or subvert it or do something new and unexpected with it, right? Okay, but in any case, let's move on. I think we can go for like a few more minutes and then we can take a break, because I feel like I'm maybe overloading you with ideas. But at that point, so if we're all on the same page, myths are kind of helpful, and to think mythically about games can be a really helpful way to think about games. I think the next question is naturally going to be, well, where do we find these myths and how do we actually create them? Right? It's, are we limited to just like having the hero's journey, for example? Are we limited just like having the classic sort of archetypal characters? I don't think that's the case. I think we can actually access myths, going back to that idea that we mentioned before. If we actually draw on our own sort of personal mythologies, that's kind of a way to access myths, right? And kind of from there, kind of infuse it into our games, right? Okay, so I believe, that myths resonate deeply with us because they are essentially archetypal experiences. Experiences that many or maybe all people share in some or other form that embody essential elements of the universal human experience. Okay, so that might sound familiar, in story and ritual and 2D character design. You might have encountered this idea, right, about the archetypes. We have those sort of classic 12 archetypes, the warrior and the magician, the caregiver, the rebel, the lover, all of those types of things. So it's kind of like the same idea, only this time we're not focusing on characters, we're focusing on experiences, right? But the idea is the same. It's like, we sort of resonate with these myths, with these stories, because in essence, they're kind of based on these archetypal experiences that we ourselves personally actually know in some or other way, right? Okay, so this is where it's going to become trippy, and this is really where I was like, I wonder if I've lost the plot, I wonder if this is going to make any kind of sense. But what I've done here is I've just quickly threw a lot of examples that I think are sort of archetypal experiences onto this slide. And, some of them might sound weird, some of them are a bit more straightforward. But I think these are examples of those experiences that we all kind of know, right? It's experiences that we all actually know intimately in some or other way, right? It might have sort of played out differently for all of us, the specifics of these experiences, but in essence, we all know these experiences in some other way, right? And obviously there will be more. This is just like my quick sort of just quickly thinking up some archetypal experiences. But jumping ahead, or just like foreshadowing for a second, where this is going is that, let's say, you have a game where there is like a chase scene, like a chase moment, what it means is, okay, simply delving into your own personal mythology, thinking about your own memories of maybe being chased at some point, even if it was like on, primary school playground, or maybe, your siblings kind of chasing you around the house or whatever the case may be. And then drawing on that experience to see if there's maybe something there that you can work into your mechanics, or the visual design of the game or the narrative, right? And that's true for all of these different ideas, right? These are like the basics of archetypal experiences, and then we can see, if we have like personal experiences of those events, and then if there's like maybe some inspiration that we can glean from that and work into our own games thing. All right. So, like I said, some of them, pretty straightforward. Like the first one, a long journey, or something like unrequited love, or being chased, or getting lost. Those are, I think, pretty straightforward. But then, if we use our imaginations, we can also see things like like this one at the top, having very serious FOMO. That's kind of my best way of wording that archetypal experience. But let's say that experience of almost feeling like existentially you're missing out. It's almost like a midlife crisis kind of thing. Like you're in a certain space, and there's a sense that elsewhere meaningful things are happening and you're missing out. In essence, that's kind of what FOMO is, right? And then if that's the archetypal experience, from there, it can manifest in many different ways. It can be that it's like somebody who's missing out on a party, but it could also be Walter Mitty, or Benjamin Button or Forrest Gump that are kind of feeling like they're missing out on like a bunch. Actually, not Forrest Gump, but the other two at least, or mostly Walter Mitty. I think that's a good example. Feeling that like you're missing out on meaning in life. So then you have like this whole story that kind of plays with that myth and shows us this character overcoming the FOMO and actually like doing stuff and going on adventures and stuff, right? So don't make the mistake to take these, like as I've worded them here, like too literally. It's really sort of basic sort of essential core archetypal moments that can actually look way differently in many different contexts, right? Or one of my favorites would be this one on the right, realizing that you are in fact trapped. I was thinking about stories like The Matrix, or even The Truman Show, right? Or let's see,
Dark City.
Right, yeah. Yeah, maybe even no, Groundhog Day. That's not quite an example. There was this one X-Files episode that kind of played with the same idea, but you actually, like, when you pay close attention to it, like there's like actually a lot of stories that deal with a character that seems to or thinks that everything is okay, like everything is normal, and then they have this turning point moment where they realized, well, no, actually they are a prisoner of this system or something, right? Like Neo realizes that he's not actually awake, he's like in this dream, he's in the Matrix, and his real body is actually like being harvested for energy, right? Or The Truman Show, like he thinks he's having a normal, straightforward life, but then it turns out he's actually like in a sitcom, pretty much, like, or in a TV production, right? So it feels like, if we can spot that event or like that sort of pattern in many different games or books or films or what have you, it's probably safe to say that it's kind of touching on or like dealing with some kind of myth, right? Or some kind of archetypal experience. And then maybe, in that case, if we just sort of speculate, if you have to sort of draw on your own personal mythology to consider how would that, like, have you actually experienced something like that? Well, might be as simple as, that one time that you kind of locked yourself into the house, but you didn't realize it for a while. And then you had this slow realization that, oh, shoot, actually, I can't get out of my own house, right? So then we're kind of taking that experience and sort of considering what made that experience memorable. What actually went through your head? What was the feelings that you experienced in that moment? And then maybe there's something there, maybe something small that you can sort of work into a different context, right? If that makes sense. Right, so we have stuff here like the American dream, public speaking, discovering something that has been right under your nose, a safe space versus an encroaching danger, monster in the house, that's like a classic one. Small people making a big difference, reality and dream merging, like, just like those basic sort of experiences that in some or other way we all know intimately even. All right. So I think, at that point, we can take a break. I think it's a good time. And then we can quickly talk about a few games and see if we can see some archetypal experiences in these games. We're just going to speculate. Obviously, we don't necessarily know what exactly went into the thinking behind these games. But yeah, let's see if we can sort of spot some archetypal ideas here. Okay. Cool. I'm going to just quickly scan through the comments here. Cool. Mana said, I've load shedding at 12 o'clock. We'll join on my phone. Okay, cool. All right, guys. Yeah, so it's, let's see. It's 11:57 now, so I think we can take a break until, at least 5 past, 5 past or 10 past. Let's make it 10 past, so maybe grab some coffee, quickly stretch your legs, process some of these ideas. If you have any questions, obviously just drop them in the chat and I'll take a look when I get back. And then, we can jump in and look at some Gris and Resident Evil and Witness and a bunch of other games. Okay, awesome. Cool. Is everybody back? Mostly.
Yes, got some coffee, ready to go.
Cool. Yeah, I have this really strong ginger tea. It's I'm not sure if it's healthy at all, but it's super strong. I'm pretty sure if you drink more than 1 cup a day, you'll probably burn a hole in your throat or something.
Keeps the COVID away.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Goodness. All right, yeah. So let's jump back in. Just get this thing away. Oops, okay, there we go. Okay, so we've been talking about archetypal experiences and myths, and making a game or having a game sort of resonate with the player in some deep way. So what I'm curious about is to see if we can actually maybe see some of that in some existing games. And I mean, it is obviously open to some interpretation. It's not necessarily, it's always a bit murky, when you have to interpret these things below the surface. But our first sort of case study here is Gris. I'm never sure if I say that correctly. Like Gris sounds like such a harsh word for such a soft, delicate game.
Yeah, it's Greece.
Greece, all right. Oh yes, it's Spanish, right? Or Portuguese,
yeah.
Or Greece. Okay, that sounds a bit better. And I actually haven't played the whole game, but I've gone through this sort of this first part where you learn some of the first sort of skills that you have, like making yourself heavy, and actually can't remember what the second skill was. I think you can sort of just jump a bit farther and so on. But one of the first moments in this game that really struck me was where you're sort of traversing this great desert, right? And these crazy winds keep coming at you, and if you don't take cover in time, you're sort of rolled back, and the wind kind of pushes you back on your path, and eventually, right, you sort of learn the skill where you make yourself heavy, right? Like, that's the only way to say it. Like, you turn into like this maybe solid block, and then the wind can't affect you anymore, right? And something about that whole moment, in context of the bigger game, I'm going to speculate here and say that what they're probably trying to sort of communicate here is like, okay, there's some sort of force, some sort of adversary, probably something mental, psychological, or just based on this landscape, everything feels kind of very abstract and metaphysical almost. So then that wind, maybe that's this traumatizing or traumatic thing that this character is kind of trying to work through, right? Or it's something that tries to debilitate them in some way. And then the experience, of actually playing the game and sort of seeing yourself being pushed back, and then learning the new skill, and then learning that when the wind comes, you kind of have to plant yourself in the ground so the wind can't affect you. Something about that tells me that the archetypal experience that we're dealing with here is maybe developing resilience in the face of kind of like the onslaught of all these, like this adversary, whether it's depression or PTSD or whatever the case may be. Like I said, I haven't I think played far enough to really give a verdict, but it's so abstract, right? It's so elegant, nothing's really spelled out for you that way, but I feel the moment resonates with you because it might be dealing with that sort of archetypal experience of at first, being sort of derailed by this adversary, and then actually developing the resilience, and then actually progressing on your journey, right? Not being affected by this thing that tries to keep pushing you back, right? So that's kind of my speculation here, and that goes to show how abstract these things can actually be, right? And the interesting thing is you can also like totally just enjoy the game without necessarily, like exploring the themes and the meaning behind everything. I think the game itself is just like really enjoyable so far. But when you do have that deeper layer, right, that second layer, like Jason Vandenberg says, that makes sense all the way down, it makes the whole experience so much more memorable and meaningful, right? Okay, cool. Yeah. So if you have any other thoughts, welcome to drop your thoughts in the chat there. Maybe I'm just talking crazy. Maybe I should just like keep playing the game so I can actually see where the story is going. But let's say, okay, that's like one archetypal moment in the game. It's like, okay, developing resilience in the face of this sort of this adversary. On a wider level, though, I would say like the whole myth of the game is probably about this character dealing with the different facets of this experience, right? Kind of making their way through this mental landscape towards maybe restoration or healing or figuring something out, some kind of transformation. So what we see is that kind of filters into all the visual stuff as well, right? It's in the style, all the delicate lines that we see in the environment, the idea of something's being sort of solid and something's being sort of fragmented and broken, and that kind of comes through, I think, in both the themes and again in the environments, even in some of the characters. Right, so it's very important, like, let's not get too caught up in just the thematic stuff and just think about archetypal experiences. Let's go a step further and also consider how is that actually going to affect the visual execution of the game, right? And that's true for the design of the game itself, but also like obviously the user interface, the menus, all of those things. Ideally, we kind of want this whole experience to feel coherent, right? Okay, and then my theory is that one way to make sure that it is coherent is to kind of have the mythical currents kind of flow through all of those things, right? Flow through the interface, the visual execution, the style, the environments, the character design, the animations, the sound design. Right, that's the thing that can kind of underpin everything. Okay, so maybe just like looking at this, what is also really interesting about the environments in this game so far is the way we have this really sort of a almost like a rhythmic balance between having these really tight spaces, right? Like you have like this really sort of densely architectural areas, and then every now and then you also have like these really big, wide open spaces where you just like feel so small, right? So maybe that's it. Maybe the archetypal moment that we're dealing with here is simply feeling small, right? Feeling small in a big world, right? Or feeling daunted maybe by the size of this mental landscape. So again, let's pause there for a second. Let's think about, okay, so let's say that's the archetypal experience that you're going for. Well, can you maybe draw on your own personal mythology? Can you draw on your own experiences of that feeling maybe? Even if you have to think back to like your childhood, right? Think back to when was the last time I like felt really, really small, or really vulnerable, or really out of my depth. And then is there something about that experience that you can work into this game, or into that moment, right? For example, I mean, Magnus, if you don't mind, if I use your game as an example, but if we're dealing with this robot trying to navigate this junkyard, and it's the first time that this robot is kind of all on their own, and eventually, they want to find the creator. If we determine that the main sort of emotion that we want the player to feel at that point, or what the character feels, and what you want the player to also feel, is vulnerability and being small and overwhelmed by the task that kind of lies in aid of them, well, then why don't we go and make the junk piles just like weirdly, obscenely big, use like weird perspective tricks to make this the whole space just feel vast and monumental, right? Like let's exaggerate the atmospheric haze so that even the things that aren't really that far away just like seem really far away, to create that illusion of size and scale and dauntingness, right? Okay, so again, every now and then, we can pause and just consider that whole process. Can we draw on our own experiences? Is there something that we can glean from our own experiences, and then how can we work that into the game, right? Okay. So I did mention the soft lines, the delicate lines. And that's actually one of the things in this game that I feel is so pleasing. It's like so aesthetically pleasing. There's no other way to say it. It's like just like even the delicate footsteps, the sound design. If you sort of traverse these delicate, I guess, structures or whatever they are, walkways. Like everything, it feels like everything reinforces that basic archetypal idea of some areas being solid, other areas being kind of flimsy, other areas maybe being sort of totally broken and sort of fragmented. And you have like this delicate character traversing this massive landscape, and I don't know, there's like something that just binds all of it together, right? And we actually see that in the menu design as well, right? We see those same delicate lines. Delicate lines, but actually strong contrast as well. It's like that's kind of what the design language is coming down to, I think. Delicate lines, pastel colors, but also strong contrast. That's kind of the thread that we can tie through everything, right? Okay. So side note, it's in media aesthetics. I very often had like the sound design students were like, kind of confused, like, well, why exactly do we need to sort of understand like this aesthetic theory and stuff? And I think this is kind of one of the examples that show how, I mean, in essence, we're dealing with these aesthetic principles, right? But then it manifests visually, but also in the sound design, right? And also in like the interaction design. It's like basic aesthetic ideas that we can sort of pull through into all of the different areas, right? Okay, awesome. Back to Inside. Like I said, this game made me feel so many emotions that I didn't know I had. So, and also like the interpretation of the meaning of this game is just I'm very curious to hear what you guys think. What the actual overall overarching theme or meaning of the game could be, or should we really even bother about like trying to find the meaning? Should we just like enjoy the experience? Like, let's actually stop there for a second. Let's hear what, like, for those of you who have played it, what's the main takeaway from here? Stefan says, get back inside. Oh, right. I haven't really thought about it that way. Huh. It did strike me as like really strange, right? Like you start where it's like, mostly safe, like out in the woods, like really far away from this sinister place. But then for some reason, you just like go deeper and deeper and deeper, and it feels really counterintuitive. But the only way to take the game forward is to just keep going. Right, the game doesn't give you that choice. Really interesting. Okay, cool. Yeah. So while Annabelle is typing, I think we can see the same thing. A small character versus a big environment. I mean, that's also maybe the vulnerability that goes along with that. I think that's also true for Inside, for many of these moments at least.
I used it as one of the examples of the 2D platformers that we explored in game aesthetics as well. And what I like about it is that it forces you to explore the narrative for yourself. It sort of takes for granted that it's a game, it's an interactive experience, and you're going to do that whether you like it or not. Like you can't actually you can't not play the game. You can't not explore it. So it like really forces you to explore the narrative and almost forces you to read the story, so to speak.
Yeah, very well said. Yeah, I think there's something really. I don't know what the word is. So Dark Souls is kind of unforgiving in its own way, but then you also have stuff like this that's kind of unforgiving on a more meta level. It's like that sort of higher level. That's like you don't have a choice. Just like go ahead with this experience. And although at some point I did explore the secrets. Like you encounter those sort of secret little thingamabobs that you sort of unplug, and I was like really really keen to like find all the secrets, just kind of to see what happens. And I like ended up missing like 2 or 3 in any case, regardless of how hard I tried. So I did watch a YouTube video about like what does actually happen, like if you actually get all those secrets. And I'm not going to spoil it, but that does actually put a different spin on that idea that Stefan just mentioned. It's do you have maybe you do have a choice, like to actually go ahead with this experience. That's kind of what the secrets come down to. Anyway, I'll leave that for you guys to discover or to explore. Annabelle says, I think I already explained this to you in Media Aesthetic, but I saw an analysis that theorized it's about cancer. Yeah, it could be, but something tells me, that just like based on the kind of how enigmatic everything in the game is, how mysterious and subtle and nuanced, it feels like, having that creature at the end just sort of represent cancer. Maybe it just feels uncharacteristically blunt, for a game that is so subtle and so nuanced. Or the player is the cancer cell, says Annabelle, which eventually mutates, and the enemies in the game are the techniques that people use to try to eliminate it. Wow. Okay. Maybe I should hold off on my opinion there. That sounds really interesting. Fascinating. If you can find that analysis, Annabelle, yeah, be sure to pass it along. Okay, but in any case, back to the visual stuff. Like if we, again, very much like the Greece example that we just mentioned, if we decide that, okay, the main thing that we kind of want to make the character or the player feel in this first, chapter, or this first part of the game, is vulnerability, or just being very small and out of their depth, then, let's go and design the environment in such a way that it just reinforces that idea, right? We can even exaggerate the size of the poles or the buildings. I mean, that's something in all of these labels, right? Like, let's jump into this one, where it's just like the sheer size of everything just makes you feel so insignificant, right? And then, yeah, obviously also exaggerating the aerial perspective, even if it means adding rain and fog, just to make it make sense even. Right. Or these, again, I think this is like a different kind of archetypal moment. You're sort of alone in this scary, mysterious world. And you have like this one random, or this like these little companions that join you out of nowhere. And again, maybe that's an archetypal experience, like a small archetypal moment. Maybe you've experienced something like that in your life, right? Maybe you were, lame example, but maybe you were alone at the party and you just kind of hit it off with like a random person, and that person became your friend for the night, and it's just like really comforting, maybe, or something like that, right? Or who knows? But again, let's delve into our own myths. Let's delve into our own experiences. Just kind of see, like, what does it actually feel like to be in that situation, and then to have like these little creatures follow you and become your companion for a while. And how does it feel when you can then lose that companion, right? Okay, so I don't know if I'm making sense there, but it's the theme for the day still. Let's delve into our own mythologies and see if there's stuff that we can glean from that, right? So Stefan says, alone at a party and then hit it off with a chicken. I can relate. So it's funny you say that, because our chickens are actually hungry at the moment and they're making noise in the background. But I don't think you guys can hear that, though. You shouldn't be able to hear it. But yeah, like this time every day, the chickens are just very adamant to get food. Right. So I think, I don't want to spoil anything. Well, I am going to spoil some things. I'm going to spoil a lot of things, but there's definitely the theme of like the sort of the mind control, right? Like all the people not really thinking for themselves, like standing in queues and all behaving kind of the same. There's definitely something there, and then the way that spills over into the mechanic of actually like where you actually control the different people, to solve the puzzles. For something that's a big part of some of the areas of the game, it feels like it must be sort of thematically relevant, right? Like why would we be controlling these people, and what does the game actually want to tell us, and why are we not like they are, sort of just sort of mindless, and right, and then you have these very uncomfortable moments where you actually have to pretend that you're part of them, right, and you kind of have to turn around when they turn around, and you have to jump when they jump, and so I feel maybe there's also like some kind of archetypal experience there of conformity, or something along those lines. But it's kind of fuzzy at the moment for me, at least. Okay, awesome stuff. And again, maybe if we jump back to this, like to these moments where the little chiclets, is that even a word? When the little birds join you, it's kind of echoed later on in these moments, right? When like those random mindless people also become kind of your companions, and you feel bad for leaving them behind, or you kind of feel bad when some of them die or seem to die, and it's kind of the same moment or the same experience that repeats again, right? And then later on, something similar happens again, right? But then it's not like the mindless people, but it's like some of the employees or like the the people that work at this place to kind of help you sort of navigate the building. All right, so for something that sort of repeats that often, it must be significant, right, to the experience in some way. Okay, and then like these moments, right? It's so risky, right? I feel like these were the moments that I really appreciated the game, where it feels like a turning point, right? Like you're trying to avoid detection most of the time, and then suddenly you are the thing that everybody looks at, and you're also naked, right? So it's kind of, I want to speculate that maybe the designers or the writers, let's just randomly, hypothetically speculate that they went through this archetypal experience idea. They kind of delved into their own experiences, or maybe dreams. We all have those dreams, or have had those dreams at some point, where you're like naked in a crowd or something like that. Or you have to present a talk, and suddenly you realize that your clothes are gone for some reason. It's like the classic sort of a archetypal dream that people talk about, right? And maybe that's what inspired this moment, right? Like to actually have the character be naked. Maybe it wasn't that way at first, but then they decided to just make this moment more pronounced and make the archetypal experience more kind of resonant. Let's make the character look more vulnerable, more on the spot, more uncomfortable and uneasy. Okay, and I guess spoiler alert. So if you want to not have the game be spoiled too much, I guess you can sort of switch off the sound and look away. But so we see that same moment again, right? We have all the people looking at you, right? Like this really uneasy moment, after you've spent the whole game just trying to avoid precisely this, avoid detection. And then in this moment, I kind of feel like this was the most, powerful moment of the game, for me personally, where you're in this room, and if you look really closely, there's a whole crowd in the distance, right? I don't know if you guys can see it on the screen, but you can just barely make out the silhouettes of the people standing in the back, and there seem to be like children even sitting at the front. And the thing is, I can imagine that a lot of games would have taken this moment, and they would think that, okay, we're going to make the player feel really uncomfortable by lighting up this whole space. Like, let's actually see how many people are are watching you at this moment, and that's going to be the thing that makes you feel uncomfortable. But then, if you maybe again delve into your own experiences, like maybe you feel really uncomfortable with being up on a stage, then you might know that, well, I'm speculating, I'm not speaking out of experience here, obviously. But you might know that the thing that makes that uncomfortable is that you actually can't see the people, right? Like, because the lights are kind of in your eyes, and you're kind of totally on the spot, and you can't actually see the people that you're presenting for, right? And that's the thing that makes you uncomfortable. So maybe that's why they decided to not actually light up this room, but to have the room almost counterintuitively dark, that we can just barely make out the crowd watching you, right? Does that make sense, guys? It feels like, okay, very often we would have this this one way of thinking about something, one way that we think we're going to make a moment work, or one way to convey a specific emotion. But then it turns out that there's actually like a more elegant and more powerful way to evoke that emotion if you actually draw on your own experiences, like your own experiences of that emotion, right? Cool. Annabelle said, this part confused me the most. I thought they'd all chase after me like they were before, but the opposite happened. Yeah, exactly. Right. Is that sort of it sets you up to think that that's going to happen, but then plot twist. Everybody just watches you, right? That's what makes this so uncomfortable. And at this point in the game, we've been chased for quite a few different times, by the dogs and whatever. So it goes to show that this can actually be more uncomfortable, right? It's like all those weird psychological, tomfoolery that's making it so uneasy. Okay, enough about Inside for now. This is a game, I don't think it's super well known, but the game is called Observer, right? It was the game with the actor from Blade Runner, did the voice acting and everything. And if we very quickly just like jump back to my random list of, or let's say a random map of archetypal experiences, right at the bottom right, we have the reality and dream merging archetype. So let's say, let's speculate that's kind of the thing that's happening here. Only difference is, here in this game, reality and dream isn't merging. It's more reality and virtuality, I guess, is merging, right? But again, like, let's imagine that because that's the archetype that you're working with, this archetypal experience of not exactly being sure if you're awake or dreaming, or like, you're kind of in that weird space in between and things are just kind of flowing together and overlapping. If you know that that's the archetypal experience that you're working with, maybe that gives you some ideas what to do with the visual design of these moments where the character is kind of linking up on the internet and things are getting glitchy and bizarre and right. So do you guys get what I'm saying? It's about using what you know about what that experience feels like, and then seeing if you can infuse the game with precisely that. Right. Cool. Annabelle says, I've played this. It messed with my eyes a lot. Lots of headaches. Yeah, so at some points it becomes really, really jarring, right? It becomes really, uncomfortable. Okay. Cool stuff. Yeah, so just aesthetically, these were really, really amazing, right? All these sort of glitchy artifacts, and it's so chaotic, it's so erratic, and yet, we just get it, right? Like, we just get what's happening here. We maybe also because we've all encountered like glitches and artifacts, like digital artifacts and distortion and stuff. So when we sort of play through this moment, it's very clear to us what the game designer is trying to do, right? Like, it's just like trying to force you into this labyrinth of distortion and craziness. Okay. Right, so it's not necessarily inviting you to make sense of all the details. It's really just about going through the experience, right? Yeah, so we have all these moments. The real life and the virtual elements are just blending together. I feel that is some kind of archetype, right? It's almost like a fever dream. You don't know if you're awake or asleep, and it's like that weird, confusing moment in between. All right, awesome. And it just escalates, right? And then you end up with headaches, like Annabelle. It's and again, it's I kind of appreciate how gutsy some of these games can be because it's really uncomfortable. It feels almost like a bad design decision to put the player through something like this. And you just kind of submit yourself to it and just go through the experience, right? Okay, awesome. So back to our list of archetypal experiences. One of our archetypal experiences was being chased, right? So I'm guessing, some of the games that do, the chase really well is the Resident Evil games. I don't typically play games like these, though, so I don't know what other examples there could be. But again, if you consider how does being chased feel like take your own archetypal experience of being chased, then you might remember that, okay, you have like that really weird feeling in your back, it's like you don't know how far your pursuer is, and everything kind of suddenly feels awkward, like navigating spaces while you're being chased. There's something about that experience that I think you can actually translate into the digital space as well, right? Like, let's not just have this space, let's design this environment in such a way that the character will be forced to almost like awkwardly navigate a space while being chased, because that's the thing that makes it tense, right, and sort of nerve-wracking, right? Or, I'm speculating here, but what would happen if we, like in a chase scene, we kind of mess with the sound design, like the sound actually sounds like the character is closer to you than he really is, to maybe emulate that effect of your pursuer kind of coming closer and coming closer and coming closer, and you kind of get that unsettling, uncomfortable feeling in your spine. I don't know if you guys know what I'm talking about. I'm curious about that idea. Like, would it be possible to like mess with sound design in a subtle enough way, that it doesn't kind of feel like cheating, but to make the chase more intense, make the pursuer feel closer than he is. Okay. Cool. Yeah. So, we've all been chased, even if it was just like on the playground. So let's take that experience and try to work it into the game. Right. Okay. The Witness, one of my favorites. At this point, I'm actually going to leave it to you guys. Like, what do you think? Like, those of you who have played the game, or even if you just like look at this screenshot, what would you speculate is the archetypal experience here? If you strip away the details, forget about, okay, like we're on an island and we are solving puzzles. What does the experience actually feel like? What are we actually doing, engaging with below the surface? Cool. Jonathan says adventuring and exploring. Cool. Have you actually played the game, Jonathan? Just out of curiosity. Right. Cool. Yeah. Let's just wait for Annabelle. I'm kind of putting you on the spot, Annabelle. We're all waiting to see your comment before I say anything else. All right. Annabelle says the inconsistency of the world is putting me off. Right. Yeah. I think we can speculate that that's maybe on purpose in this particular game. So I would say, the archetypal experience here is very much related to the labyrinth, like navigating a labyrinth. It's not physically a labyrinth actually, but mentally, philosophically, in terms of meaning, it's almost is very much like a labyrinth, right? So you're going around this island and you're solving the puzzles, and it unlocks new areas. But along the way, you pick up like these USB drives and like audio files and stuff, and everything kind of revolves around the meaning of humans and how they kind of produce meaning, and perspective. How can you sort of gain perspective on your own existence, stuff like that. Very lofty stuff. So what I found interesting about this is, if that's the archetype, we're dealing with some kind of sort of a metaphysical labyrinth that you have to navigate. Can we maybe then design the environment to echo that? Not make it like a physical labyrinth, but make it feel like a labyrinth in some way, right? And even then, in the shape of the puzzles, like the shapes of the puzzles actually look like little mazes, right? And there's something about the puzzles that I feel like even resonate with those audio files, or like there's something about it's very abstract and it's kind of difficult to explain. Like if you haven't played the game, you don't know what the puzzles look like. But even a game like this, it's not necessarily a game that we might easily make the mistake to think, okay, it's just like all about the puzzles, and then reaching the top of the mountain and so on. But I feel there's like actually really interesting, deeper ideas here, right? Okay, awesome. So I think that's it. Yeah. So that's it for the examples. So just like by way of summary, quickly, if myths are essentially archetypal experiences, we've talked about this idea quite a lot, but just to quickly run through it again. And archetypal experiences are these things that we can all relate to in some or other way, because we've kind of had those experiences ourselves. That's kind of what makes it an archetypal experience. What that means is that we can delve into our own personal mythologies, our own experiences, dreams, memories, to access a library of mythical experiences, right? And I feel that's like a very helpful idea, because I believe, the danger is that, you kind of think about game design as a lot of mechanical stuff, that kind of has to fit together, and it's easy to get caught up in the technicalities of actually executing that and making that work. I feel what this idea does is it gives us this this way of maybe infusing humanness into that digital space, right? It's infusing humanness and like I said, that sort of resonance into that experience. Okay, so we can use our own archetypal experiences as inspiration for the myths that we tell, explore, challenge, or build. Okay, cool stuff. So wow. Okay, it's actually like 10 to 1. I think this second section is actually something that you can rather work through on your own. It's like this is where it becomes like kind of self-reflection, like going through a bunch of questions and just like using the questions as prompts and departure points to kind of explore some of these ideas. So it's not necessarily something that we have to do now, like in class. But what it comes down to, like my argument here is that we can maybe start by exploring our own mythological sort of landscape by specifically, trying to think back to our first memories of really strong emotions. So stuff like joy, love, fear, anger, sadness, those emotions that tend to make like a really deep impression on you, right? And the reason I think that's a good place to begin is very often, if you explore your first memories of those ideas or those emotions, it kind of leads you to some of your sort of archetypal experiences, right? Like, your first memory of fear, for example, like surely that has to be some kind of archetypal experience, like, way back, when you were little and, whatever, like, well, I specifically remember that I was lying in bed one night and, like a painting fell off the wall, and I just like freaked out, because everything's sort of peaceful and quiet, and suddenly there's this noise very close by, and it's not supposed to be there. I like don't understand the noise and everything. So maybe there's something there, right? Something in that experience that we can maybe then turn into game mechanics in some way. Like I know that's kind of fuzzy and abstract, but That's kind of the idea of these things, right? So let's explore, joy, love, fear, anger, all of those things. And then my theory is that if you specifically try to think of your like most distant memory of those emotions or of those experiences, that you actually like you don't remember that like the details that weren't really important, right? Like the way we remember those experiences of like love, fear, anger, stuff like that. In the memories, we tend to see like the sort of crystallized version of the experience, right? Like you don't remember the stuff that wasn't important. You remember the things that kind of made up that experience, right? Well, you can do the same thing with dreams. If you think about like what exactly is it in a dream that kind of stands out, like resonates with you or makes a dream memorable? Is it like the way the space works? Like, is it the way the space looks? Is it the way the lighting was like set up or whatever? So thinking back to distant memories or even like considering your dreams and stuff like that, I feel that's a way to sort of access these old archetypal experiences. Okay. So what these slides are, it's we can skip that one for now. It's a way of accessing those archetypal moments, those archetypal experiences. And what I then suggest is like, remember, we actually want to make it practical, right? Like we actually want to draw the thread between like, okay, those experiences and then how we can then actually execute that visually, maybe like how can we turn that into like game mechanics or like visual design or lighting or color use, or what can we take out of those like archetypal experiences and actually turn it into something concrete, right? So my suggestion is that you go through these questions, like here they are. What is your first memory of joy, love, fear, anger, sadness? Recurring dreams or dream spaces. But then specifically with all of those, come back to these questions, and ask yourself, is there something striking about the way the memory looks? In that one memory, like, can you actually remember? Can you actually remember what else was in the room, or can you literally just remember the interaction between you and other person, or like maybe that memory of your first memory of fear, when you were little, maybe the whole space just like felt way larger than it is because you were like actually tiny, and maybe you remember the way that you can't really, because it was dark, you can't really see that far, so you kind of only have like this really small radius of like view or whatever. So all of those things that kind of make those memories memorable, right? What was the lighting like? What was the color like? How big or small did the space feel? How far can you see? Are there things that kind of pull your attention, or are there kind of a lot of details in the room or whatever? Okay, so this is where it becomes kind of fuzzy and abstract and weird, maybe. But I feel like if we go through this exercise, you kind of end up having these very interesting things to kind of maybe bring into your games, right? Or bring into the design or whatever. Okay. So after you go through those, like your first memory of joy, love, fear, anger, and sadness, what you can then do is be specific to your game. Like choose a very significant and prominent emotion in your game specifically, right? Or a specific moment, and then ask those same questions, right? Like, what is your first memory of that emotion? So, if you want to make the player feel vulnerable, what is your first memory or like some strong memories of feeling vulnerable? Like, and is there something in those memories that you can then transfer into the game, right? Into the game moment. All right, what is your first memory of that emotion? Have you experienced something that is similar to that moment in the game? What was it like? What can you remember of it? All right, so we're looking for connections, right? We're looking for things that we can bring into our actual, into the way we design our games. Okay, cool. And then just to summarize, this is my attempt to just quickly summarize like all the ideas that we ran through. But we started with myths, right? We said that basing your visuals, the narrative, the mechanics on archetypal experiences can make the game resonate deeply with the player, right? That's just like the way it is. But also like using myths and archetypal experiences allows you to tell tell, explore, challenge, and build myths, and even change the way people think about something. Maybe just like one side note on that, something that we didn't mention earlier with the Last of Us example is like if you go through the whole experience of playing the Last of Us 2 or like part 2, and in real life, you find yourself in a situation where somebody seems to behave one way, like, isn't there maybe just like a slightly greater chance that you're going to think, or maybe just like a slightly greater chance that you're maybe going to give that person the benefit of the doubt, maybe, because you acknowledge, like you've gone through this whole experience of like playing things from different perspectives and like seeing people's backstories and, putting yourself in other people's shoes and stuff like that. Maybe that helps you just give that person the benefit of the doubt, right? And try to understand their story or something like that, right? It sounds cheesy, right? It sounds kind of, fuzzy, but I think that's kind of the power of this stuff, right? Like if you take people through those myths, there is actually a chance that you can actually help people change the way they think about things, right? Okay, and I mean, take all the negative stuff in the world, so discrimination or racism or what have you. Those are myths, right? That could be challenged, right? And you're writing stories, essentially, right? You're making these interactive experiences. You can use archetypal experiences, you can infuse your games with these experiences that resonate with people, but then you can take them on this journey to kind of show them maybe a different myth, right? Like show them a different way for that to unfold, right? So there is actually, I'm convinced that there is a lot of potential, a lot of power in this idea, right? Okay, and then lastly, because you have your own mythology of archetypal experiences, you can delve into your own experiences, dreams, and memories for inspiration for visuals, narratives, and mechanics. All right, the end. Right at the end, though, there is like a few last quotes, but I'll leave that for you to work through. Does anybody actually have any questions? Wow. Feels like we just like ran through a lot of ideas. Oof. Radio silence. Is anybody still out there? Oh, actually, Annabelle said earlier, sprinting down dark corridors to get to my room. Pretty sure the door was moving farther away from me. Yeah, so excellent. Like if that's the way you remember that experience, surely there must be something there, right? There must be something that you can maybe work into, like a chase scene or like some, I'm convinced that could be inspiring stuff. All right, and Jonathan says there is a lot to take in. Not gonna lie. Okay. Yeah, well, it was a pretty dense 2 hours. I can't actually believe we were busy for the whole 2 hours. Wow. Okay. Cool, but yeah, I hope that is helpful, guys. I hope that is helpful. Even if it's not like helpful straight away, maybe it just like floats around in your head, and eventually, it's something clicks or you remember something, and back to that very, right at the beginning. Remember, I said that this session is going to be a success if, at the very least, we just have a different way, different way to think about games, right? And if you can see the link between real life stuff and game world stuff, right? Or if you have a new way to think about how the different parts of a game can work together, right? And hopefully you feel stoked about the games that you're making, and hopefully you can also see how this can be like a continually rewarding process, right? Because you're actually dealing with very human stuff, like human stuff and myths and really powerful ideas. Okay. Cool. Hermana says, well, actually, Jonathan said my brain is on the verge of being fried to bits. I hope in a good way, though. Hermana says, how can you work archetypal experience into games like city builders or simulation games? Yeah, so there will obviously be games where it's kind of fuzzy. I'm not exactly sure. So Lucille told me about her game the other day. Like, if I'm not mistaken, it's like about the janitor chasing or killing killer wasps, and I was like, I wonder how all of these lofty ideas of mine if these lofty ideas about myths and what have you, how is that going to be relevant to a game about the janitor sort of chasing hornets? But I thought about it, and I think, yeah, there's definitely something there. Maybe something about, okay, like the janitor, like small character making a big difference, or there could be chase scenes there, obviously. So I don't know, like in a city builder or simulation game, you have to go through those questions, see if you come up with something. Maybe it doesn't necessarily play into the visuals of your game, but more into the experience, the mechanics, right? Like if you think about what exactly is it, why exactly was it rewarding to build Lego when you were small, right? Like what exactly about that experience is rewarding? Maybe there's some kind of archetypal thing there, and then maybe there's inspiration for your game, like to make your city builder or your simulation more rewarding in some way, right? But no, I totally acknowledge that there's a lot of fuzziness, there's a lot of question marks. I'm going to leave it in your hands to explore. Okay, cool. Okay, guys. So yeah, I think it is 1:00. So I'm guessing, yeah, you're free to leave the session. I'm going to stick around for a while, just in case you have some questions, or if anybody wants to tell me about their games. I'm very curious. But otherwise, yeah, just have a good weekend, guys. Good luck with all the work. Good luck with week 6 that's coming up, and let me know if there happens to be something I can help with.